The wind howled through the jagged mountains like a chorus of lost souls. Snowflakes twisted in spirals, drifting down to coat the northern kingdom in a quiet, icy shroud. At the heart of this frozen land stood a castle of stone and shadow, its towers clawing at the sky, its walls scarred from storms and battles past. Few dared to approach, for tales spoke of its ruler, the Lycan king, who carried a curse as old as the mountains themselves. Some whispered that he could shift into a wolf as black as night, his eyes glinting like moonlight on steel. Others said his rage alone could crumble walls and shatter hearts. Yet tonight, the castle seemed quieter than usual. The northern wind rattled the shutters and tore at the banners, but inside the king was restless. He strode through the empty halls, boots echoing against cold stone. A shadow among shadows. The castle had stood for centuries, but its walls were no longer strong. Time and neglect had worn them thin, and each winter brought the threat of collapse. It was on the eastern wall that he noticed movement. A faint figure, hunched and laboring in the snow, her hands gripping a hammer and chisel, her breath visible in the freezing air. He froze. At first, he thought it might be one of the castle servants, but the figure moved with a strange determination, deliberate, unyielding. He stepped closer, the crunch of snow under his boots masked by the howl of the wind. The closer he came, the more he realized. The figure was a woman, heavily pregnant, yet working tirelessly to mend the crumbling stones. Her clothes were simple, worn, patched in several places. A faint glow of frost painted her hair and shoulders, and her skin was pale, almost luminous against the dark stones of the castle. The Lycan king's first instinct was suspicion. Who was she? How had she entered the castle grounds? And why, of all people, was she working on his walls? The thought of trespassers or thieves ignited his anger, a familiar heat in his chest. Yet another part of him, a quieter, more curious part, paused. There was no fear in her eyes, only focus, and perhaps something deeper, determination. "You!" he called, his voice rolling like distant thunder. "Stop this at once! Who are you to touch my walls?" The woman did not flinch. She straightened, her hand tightening around the hammer. Her voice, soft yet steady, carried over the wind. "I repair what is broken. The wall will fall if no one tends it. I only wish to help." "Help?" he growled, stepping closer. "You have no right. This is my castle and I am its master. Leave at once or—" "I have nowhere else to go," she interrupted, her words cutting through his rage. "No home, no family, only the strength I carry in my arms. And if I do not mend this wall, the stones will fall, and your people may be in danger." He studied her, the anger in his chest clashing with a strange, unwelcome stir of pity. She spoke like someone who had endured great loss, yet refused to surrender. He noticed the roundness of her belly, the careful way she shifted her weight to avoid strain, and the fatigue that tugged at her shoulders. A part of him, long buried beneath fear and fury, recognized courage, and it made him uneasy. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice softer, almost reluctant. "Who sent you?" "No one," she replied. "I travel alone. I survive alone. I only saw the wall fall and could not turn away." The Lycan king's eyes narrowed. No one had dared speak to him like this before. Servants trembled. Nobles bowed. Yet she did not bow. She did not beg. She did not fear him. And in that defiance, he felt something unfamiliar. Intrigue. "Do you know what this wall is?" he asked, stepping closer until the icy wind cut between them. "It has stood for centuries. It is more than stone. It is protection, history, power. And you—" His words faltered as he studied her face, pale and determined, framed by wisps of hair frozen by frost. "You are—" Nothing here. You have no claim, no right, and yet you labor as if you do. I claim nothing, she said, lowering her hammer. I claim only that which needs care, that which will fall if I do not act. The wind whipped harder, and snow stung their faces. The castle seemed to groan under the weight of the storm, the walls trembling as if echoing her words. For a moment, the Lycan king felt the old, familiar pang of isolation that had haunted him for years. He had power, armies, fear. Yet there had been no one to mend the broken parts of his life, no one to care for him beyond duty or fear. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where dark clouds gathered like rolling mountains of smoke and snow, and then he realized she had no home, no walls to protect her, no hearth to warm her nights, no name in the halls of power, nothing but herself and the child she carried. A strange emotion rose in him, a mix of protectiveness and longing he had not felt in decades. He knew the stories his counselors whispered, that the Lycan king was merciless, cruel, and impossible to touch with kindness. Yet here, in the midst of the storm, he felt compelled to act, to step beyond the cold walls of his power and reach for something human. "Come inside," he said finally, his voice low, uncertain. "You will not survive the night here alone." The woman paused, studying him as if measuring the truth behind his words. Her eyes, sharp and cautious, searched his face. Then slowly she nodded. "If you truly wish to help, I will come. But I do not belong in your halls." "You belong where you are safe," he replied. "And right now, this castle is all you have." Together, they made their way through the castle gates, snow crunching underfoot. Servants peeked from the shadows, whispering and staring, unsure whether to fear the king or the strange woman he had chosen to shelter. The warmth of the castle greeted them, yet it did not reach the corners of his heart where shadows lingered. She was given a small chamber near the eastern wall, with a narrow bed and a view of the storm-lashed mountains. She unpacked a few belongings, a bundle of clothes, a worn blanket, a small carved charm she clutched to her chest. The Lycan king lingered at the doorway, unsure why he had not left, why his gaze lingered on her in quiet fascination rather than command. "You should rest," he said finally, his voice gruff. "Tomorrow we will see about the wall." "I do not rest well," she admitted, her voice soft. "Not since I became what I am now." He raised an eyebrow. "And what are you now?" "A mother," she said simply. The word hung in the air like a fragile promise, fragile and yet powerful. The Lycan king looked away, his jaw tightening. He had known fear, battle, rage, but he had never known the weight of life growing within someone, nor the quiet strength it demanded. Something stirred within him, something ancient and deep, a recognition that the world had more to teach him than power and fear. The wind continued to howl outside. The castle groaned. The fire in her small chamber flickered, throwing shadows across her face, and he found himself drawn to those shadows as if they held answers he had never dared seek. And then the snow fell harder. One sharp gust shattered the stillness, and a loud crack echoed from the eastern wall, the very stones she had worked so tirelessly to mend. The Lycan king felt a surge of protective instinct he could not ignore. He ran to the battlements, finding the wall trembling, as if ready to collapse entirely. She was there, hands on the stones, ready to brace them. Her eyes met his, wide and determined. He wanted to shout, to tell her to step back, but instead, he found himself frozen, watching, feeling, unable to leave her alone against the threat of falling stone and wind. For the first time in decades, the Lycan king understood a fear he could not command, the fear of losing someone who carried the future, someone whose survival meant more than pride, power, or legend. and as the first snow of the night settled over them, he realized with a jolt that he could not leave her to face the storm alone. Not when she had no home, not when she had nothing but herself and the life she carried within her. The howl of the wind mingled with the distant cry of wolves, and deep in his chest, a new, unsettling awareness stirred. Perhaps this stranger, this pregnant woman repairing his walls, was meant to change him in ways he had never imagined. The castle loomed around them, ancient and cold, but for the first time it did not feel entirely empty, to be continued. The castle was quieter than usual after the storm, but the halls still carried the echo of the wind. Snow clung to the battlements, glittering under the weak winter sun. Inside, the fire in the great hall burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. The Lycan king moved like a shadow among shadows, his presence both commanding and distant. Yet now, he was no longer alone. The pregnant woman had settled into the small chamber near the eastern wall, her hands still dusted with stone from the repairs she had made. She had worked tirelessly, her resolve unbroken even by the storm that had nearly claimed her life. The king watched her from the hallway, unseen, noting the strength in her posture, the quiet determination in her movements, and the gentle way she cradled her belly as she stretched. He felt a strange pull in his chest, an unfamiliar curiosity mingled with protectiveness. He had ruled with fear for decades, relying on the strength of his pack, the loyalty of his servants, and the sharpness of his claws. Yet this woman, fragile and human, had touched something in him that neither power nor rage could reach. He stepped into the room. She looked up, startled, but did not flinch. "You should not have stayed outside in the storm yesterday," he said, his voice rough, but carrying an undercurrent of concern he did not fully understand. "I could not leave the wall broken," she replied calmly, her eyes meeting his without fear. "It would have fallen entirely if I had not worked. Some things need care, even if the world is cruel." The Lycan king felt a pang of unease at her words. Cruelty was familiar to him. He had lived surrounded by it for years. Yet here was someone who had endured it and still chose to act with purpose, even in the coldest, harshest conditions. "You are strong," he admitted, stepping closer. "Stronger than most who walk my halls." "I have to be," she said softly. "I carry more than just myself now. My child depends on me." The words hung in the air like a fragile promise. The king did not reply. He felt the weight of their meaning pressing against him, stirring something he had long buried, a sense of responsibility, a flicker of tenderness, and an unfamiliar longing. He gestured toward the chair by the fire. "Sit. You must rest. The wall can wait." "I do not rest easily," she admitted. "I am always aware of what is broken, what could fall, what could harm those I care for. Sleep feels like a luxury I cannot afford." He studied her quietly, the firelight catching the curve of her face, the strength in her hands. There was something noble in her resolve, something that demanded respect rather than obedience. And for the first time he wondered, was it possible that she might teach him what it meant to care for another, to protect rather than dominate? A sudden howl tore through the mountains outside. The king's body stiffened, instincts sharpening. The sound was both familiar and unsettling, a call of the wild, a reminder of the beast within him that lurked, always present, beneath the skin of a man. She did not flinch. Instead, she moved closer to the window, peering into the snow-laden forest below. "The wolves," she whispered. "They are restless tonight." He approached her, his shadow falling over her as the moonlight glinted on the frost outside. "You should not stand so close to danger," he said, his voice low and commanding. "The wolves are not tame, and they do not forgive intruders." "They do not harm unless threatened," she replied, her voice steady. I have learned their ways. I respect their world as I do my own." The king felt a flicker of admiration, quickly buried under a tide of conflicting emotions. He was used to being obeyed, to being feared. This woman, fragile yet fearless, did not obey. She did not fear. And in that defiance, she unsettled him more than any army could. Night fell, and the castle grew colder. The fire in her chamber burned brighter against the dark, but shadows still clung to the corners. He lingered near the door, watching her move about the small space, her hand smoothing the blanket over the narrow bed, arranging the few belongings she had brought. "You are cautious," he said finally, stepping fully into the room. "Always watching, always measuring. Why?" "I have learned that the world is not kind to those who do not watch," she said simply. "I have survived because I see what others ignore, because I act when others hesitate." He felt a stirring of something he could not name. Respect, yes, but also something heavier, something that rooted him in the present and demanded attention. The Lycan king, who had ruled through fear and strength, felt a strange, unsettling longing to shield her from the world's cruelty. And yet he knew that even he could not fully protect her, not from the storms, not from the walls, not from what might come from beyond the castle gates. The wind rose again, and with it came a howl that sliced through the night. The woman flinched slightly, then stood taller. He moved beside her, his presence grounding, protective. For a moment, the silence between them spoke louder than words, a shared recognition of danger, of survival, of life pressed against the edge of the world. "You should not fear me," he said, almost a whisper, almost to himself. "I will not let them harm you." "I do not fear you," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "I fear what comes from the shadows beyond this castle, not from the man who guards it." The words cut through him, soft but firm. He had spent decades guarding himself, his walls as high as the castle towers, yet here was someone who challenged not just his rule, but the very barriers he had built around his heart. The hours passed, and the storm raged on outside. The woman eventually sat by the fire, cradling her belly, her eyes distant. He remained standing, watching, the beast inside him stirring, sensing the fragility of life before him, sensing the pull of emotions he had long denied. "Do you know what it is to be watched always?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft, almost reflective. "To live every day knowing that survival is never guaranteed?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched her, noticing the curve of her jaw, the determination in her hands, the quiet power in the gentleness of her gaze. "I do," he admitted finally. "I have lived under the weight of eyes that judge and fear. And yet, you seem different. You face the world, not hiding from it." "I have no choice," she said. "No home, no family, only what I can carry and what I can protect." The words echoed in his mind. He realized with a sudden clarity that she was not just repairing walls outside. She was rebuilding something far more fragile and precious inside herself. And perhaps, unknowingly, she had begun to do the same with him. A low growl rose from deep within him, instinctual and raw. The full moon would rise soon, and with it, the beast he had long kept chained beneath his skin. He felt it stirring, restless, powerful. He stepped away from her, pacing the room, struggling to reconcile the duality within him. The man who longed to protect, and the beast that demanded dominance. She watched him quietly, unafraid, understanding more than he could imagine. "The night is long," she said softly, "and it is not the wind that will bring danger." Her words were a challenge, a truth he could not deny. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm within him, the conflict of power, desire, fear, and something approaching. Tenderness. He moved closer, careful, as if measuring his own control. "I will not harm you," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "But I cannot promise the beast will remain silent if danger comes." "I do not fear the beast," she replied simply. "I fear only what is careless, what is cruel. I trust that you are neither." For a long moment, silence fell. Only the fire crackled, only the wind howled, only the faint heartbeat of life in her belly reminded him of what was at stake. And then, from the distant mountains, a wolf howled, a long, mournful note that seemed to speak to him, to warn him, to awaken something he had tried to bury. He took a deep breath, the weight of the night pressing against him. For the first time in decades, he felt a strange vulnerability, a recognition that he could not protect her from everything. But he would try. He would guard her life, her home, her heart, as fiercely as any beast or king could. And as the first moonlight spilled into the chamber, bathing her in silver, he realized that something was changing, not just in her, but in himself. The Lycan king, feared, cursed, and alone for so long, found himself drawn to a fragile, fearless stranger who had no home. And in that realization, he understood that the night ahead would test him in ways no battle ever could. The storm outside had passed, but a storm had begun within the castle walls and within his heart. To be continued. The castle, once quiet, was now alive with unrest. Rumors of a pregnant stranger living within the Lycan king's halls had reached the ears of rival nobles. Whispers of betrayal, scandal, and opportunity swirled through the northern kingdom like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. Some saw her as leverage, others as a threat to the king's authority. Yet inside the castle, the woman moved with quiet resolve. She tended to the wounded animals in the stables, repaired sections of the wall weakened by winter storms, and organized small stores of food for the approaching cold. She spoke little, but every action was deliberate, careful, and necessary. The Lycan king watched her from the shadows, torn between desire and caution. He was no stranger to danger, but there was something in her presence that unsettled him more than any invading army. Perhaps it was her fearlessness, her refusal to bow or beg, or the simple fact that she had no home yet carried herself as though she belonged in his halls. She had awakened something in him that he had long thought lost, the need to protect, to nurture, to connect. The storm outside had ceased, leaving the forest blanketed in frost, but the sense of tension within the castle grew. One evening, the Lycan king approached her while she worked by the eastern wall, examining a crack in the stone. "You work too hard," he said, his voice rough but carrying an unspoken concern. "I cannot let the wall fall," she replied, not looking up. "Not while I can repair it." "Your strength amazes me," he admitted, stepping closer. "Yet you risk too much. You are carrying a life. That life deserves care, not danger." She finally looked at him, her eyes steady, yet soft. "I know the risk. But if I do not act, no one will. No one else sees the broken things, the walls, the lives at stake. I do what I can, because I must." Her words struck him with the weight of truth. He had ruled his kingdom with strength, sometimes with cruelty, but had he ever truly protected what mattered, or had he only preserved power? The realization was uncomfortable, stirring guilt he could not name. That night, the wind howled outside once more, rattling the castle's ancient stones. He found her standing by the window, staring into the silvered forest below. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the snow. He felt the familiar stir of the beast inside him, the Lycan he could not fully deny. "You should not be here," he said softly. It is not safe. I am not afraid of the forest, she replied. It is silent and patient. I respect it. I do not fear it. He studied her, feeling the strange pull of admiration and desire. She feared nothing except carelessness and cruelty. And in that fearlessness, he saw a reflection of the man he could become if he allowed himself to be vulnerable. Days passed, and the tension outside the castle walls grew. Rival nobles sent envoys, some friendly, others hostile, all curious about the woman living inside the king's fortress. The Lycan king had to navigate these threats carefully, yet inside, his attention remained on her, on the life she carried, on the quiet strength that seemed to mend not only the walls of stone, but the walls around his own heart. One evening, as the fire burned low in her chamber, she spoke quietly. "Do you know what it is to be truly alone?" she asked, her gaze distant. He hesitated, the weight of centuries pressing against his chest. "I know solitude," he admitted. "I have lived with it, surrounded by walls, by power, by fear. Yet, even in solitude, there is the knowledge that no one will ever truly reach you. That knowledge can be more cruel than any enemy." Her hand rested on her belly. Loneliness is different when you carry life within you. You cannot hide from it. You cannot ignore it. It demands care, attention, and courage. He knelt beside her, careful, unsure how close he should be, feeling the stirrings of the beast within him as well as the man he wished to become. "And yet you face the world alone," he said softly, "even now." "I have no choice," she replied. "I can only move forward, repair what is broken, and protect what matters." Her words were not a plea. They were a statement of truth, and the Lycan king realized that her courage was a mirror to his own. She had endured what he had tried to bury beneath power and fear. And in her, he saw the possibility of redemption, not through battle or dominance, but through care, through connection, through love. The full moon rose high, silver light spilling across the walls. The Lycan king's transformation stirred, his instincts prickling, warning him of the danger his beast could bring. She sensed it, though she did not flinch. She merely stepped closer, placing a hand on the stone wall, steadying herself, waiting. "You do not fear me," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Why?" "I have learned to respect life," she replied simply. "Even yours, even the beast you carry within." Her words calmed him in ways he could not fully explain. The transformation came, as it always did under the moon, but this time he held back. The wolf within him stirred, powerful and raw, yet restrained by the presence of a woman who had no claim to fear, only courage. Outside, wolves howled at the moon, their voices carrying through the forest. Inside, the castle was still, except for the quiet stirrings of two hearts, one human, one beast, learning to navigate a fragile bond of trust. The days that followed brought new challenges. The rival nobles, sensing weakness, plotted quietly. Their spies attempted to enter the castle, their words sharp and their threats subtle. The Lycan king had to confront them, to protect both his kingdom and the woman who had captured his attention in ways he could not name. Yet each night, he found himself drawn to her chamber, drawn to the quiet strength she displayed, the careful way she moved, the unwavering determination that mirrored his own in many ways. He realized that she was not merely repairing walls of stone, she was repairing something far more delicate, the walls around his heart. One night, a messenger arrived, warning of an approaching force of mercenaries intent on capturing the castle. The Lycan king gathered his loyal guards, yet his thoughts remained on her. She was more than a stranger, more than a pregnant woman with no home. She had become the anchor he had not known he needed. He found her in her chamber, tending the fire. "You must leave this room," he said, voice low, commanding. "Danger approaches. You cannot face it." "I cannot leave what I protect," she replied. "The castle, the animals, the walls, all of it matters. I am not afraid." He felt the tug of helplessness, the unfamiliar fear for another's life. "You are not strong enough to face this alone," he said. "I will not allow it." Her eyes met his, steady, unwavering. "Then we face it together." The words struck him, a promise and a challenge. He had lived a life of solitude, ruled by fear and power. Yet here was someone offering partnership, offering trust, offering courage without hesitation. The night fell, dark and silent, except for the wind outside and the distant howls of wolves. The Lycan king and the woman stood side by side, preparing for the approaching threat. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility not as a king alone, but as a protector of something fragile and precious. And as the moon reached its peak, casting silver light over the castle, he realized a truth he could not deny. He could not protect her without facing the beast within himself. The Lycan, the king, the man, each part of him would be tested in ways he had never known. Yet he no longer feared the test. Not entirely. For in the presence of the woman who had no home, who carried life within her, he had found something worth fighting for. Not power, not revenge, not fear, but trust, courage, and the possibility of love. The castle walls, scarred and weathered, seemed to lean closer, as if acknowledging the bond forming within. The night outside was dark, but within something flickered, fragile, tentative, yet unbreakable. And as the first winds of the approaching battle stirred the branches outside, the Lycan king understood that the world he had known, the world of fear, solitude, and power, was changing. He did not yet know if the change would bring salvation or suffering, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would not face it alone, to be continued. The night had grown thick and silent, broken only by the distant howl of wolves and the creak of old castle stones settling under the weight of winter. The Lycan king stood at the highest battlement, his eyes scanning the darkened forest beyond. Snow crunched under his boots, and the wind tugged at his cloak. Below, the castle's walls, repaired carefully by the stranger, glinted silver under the moonlight. He had sensed them coming, rival nobles, mercenaries, spies, but their numbers, their intent, did not matter as much as what he had learned in the past weeks. He could no longer fight solely for fear, for power, or for vengeance. He would fight to protect life, fragile and human, for the woman and the child she carried. Inside the castle, she moved quietly through the corridors, her hands steady despite the labor of carrying life within her. The baby stirred occasionally, reminding her that every decision, every movement mattered. She had learned to respect the castle, the man who ruled it, and the wolf that lived beneath his skin. In return, he had learned to respect her courage, her wisdom, and the way she faced danger with calm determination. The alarm sounded suddenly, a cry from the outer walls. Torches flared as sentries shouted, and the castle came alive with movement. The mercenaries had arrived, shadows moving through the forest like predators stalking prey. The Lycan king's eyes narrowed, and the beast within him stirred, sensing the threat, the intrusion, the possibility of destruction. He shifted, a ripple of power passing through his form. Yet unlike before, this time he did not succumb fully to the wolf. The man within him held fast, driven not by rage, but by purpose, the need to protect those who had no home, no strength beyond what they carried in themselves. She found him in the great hall, his presence both commanding and terrifying. "You cannot face them alone," she said, steady despite the fear tugging at her chest. "I will not let them harm you," he replied, his voice a low growl. "Stay here. Guard the child. Guard life itself." "I am not helpless," she said, placing a hand gently on her belly. "And neither is the life I carry. We are stronger than you know." He studied her for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. She had endured storms, traveled alone, survived cruelty, and still stood unwavering. He realized then that strength was not measured by power or claws alone. It was measured by courage, by resilience, by the willingness to protect others even when danger loomed. The first clash came suddenly. Shadows moved through the outer gates, figures striking at the walls, testing the defenses. The king roared, a sound that shook the air, the wind carrying it like a herald of death. He ran to the battlements, his form shifting, muscles coiling, his senses heightened. The wolf emerged, black and powerful, yet his mind remained intact, guided by purpose rather than fury. The mercenaries faltered, their confidence shaken by the sheer presence of the beast that commanded both fear and awe. Yet they pressed on, and the battle grew violent. Snow churned beneath hooves and boots, torches flared, and the clash of steel rang against the castle stones. Inside, the woman stayed near the fire, tending her supplies, her hands trembling slightly as she listened to the chaos outside. The life within her kicked once, then twice, as if responding to the danger. She whispered softly, her words carried with love and hope. "Be strong. Protect us." Time seemed to stretch, each moment a heartbeat of fear, each breath a measure of courage. The Lycan king fought fiercely, his dual nature guiding him, blending human strategy with animal strength. He moved like shadow and flame, striking with precision, protecting the walls, the servants, the animals, and most of all, the woman whose presence had begun to heal him. Hours passed, the night a blur of motion, sound, and light. Finally, as the first hint of dawn touched the snow-laden forest, the invaders retreated, broken and disorganized. The castle stood, scarred but unbroken, a testament to determination, courage, and the bond that had formed within its walls. He returned to her chamber, now fully human again, though the glow of the fight still lingered in his eyes. She looked up from the small chair where she had been resting, her hand on her belly, face pale but unafraid. "You are safe," he said, his voice quiet, though the power within him still hummed beneath the surface. "The threat is gone." "And yet you returned," she said softly, "even after facing the beast within yourself." "I could not leave you," he admitted. "Not when you had no home. Not when you carried life within you that needed protection. Not when you were here." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, a small smile graced her lips. "Then I am glad you returned," she whispered, "because I would have faced the night, but not alone, not without you." The Lycan king knelt beside her, placing a careful hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her body and the life she carried. "You have no home," he said quietly, "but perhaps you have one now." A moment of silence passed, heavy with meaning. The snow outside began to melt under the rising sun, and the castle, once lonely and cold, seemed to embrace the new day. He felt the weight of centuries lift slightly, the curse that had bound him slowly loosening in the presence of trust, courage, and life. The birth came quietly, yet with the force of a storm. She labored, guided by the instincts that had carried her through life, and the Lycan king stayed at her side, holding her hand, offering strength without overbearing dominance, fear without cruelty. The castle seemed to hold its breath, the walls and stones whispering with ancient echoes as life entered the world. When the child cried, a sound pure and clear, the king felt something shift within him. The beast, the curse, the years of solitude, they all seemed to pale before the fragile human life he held in his arms. The woman rested, exhausted but triumphant, and he knelt beside her. The warmth of the fire and the newborn blending into a moment of peace he had never known. "This is your home," he said softly, looking at both mother and child. "Not just the castle, but this, life, trust, courage, strength, all of it belongs to you now." She looked at him, eyes glistening with tears and relief. "And you?" she asked quietly. "What of you?" He paused, searching for the words, feeling the enormity of the past, the weight of power, and the vulnerability he had long denied. "I am no longer alone, and perhaps I no longer wish to be. You have given me something I thought lost forever, a reason, a bond, a home beyond stone and shadow." The child stirred again, and she smiled faintly, her hand on the baby's back. "Then we are all home," she whispered. Days passed, and the castle slowly returned to its rhythm. Repairs continued, not just to the walls, but to the hearts within them. The Lycan king patrolled the forest and the halls, no longer ruled solely by fear, but guided by care, respect, and the promise of protection. The woman moved through the castle with a quiet authority born not of title, but of courage, wisdom, and the life she had brought into the world. The wolves in the forest howled in greeting, as if recognizing the shift. The northern winds carried a different song now, not of warning, but of life, of hope, of bonds forged in shadow and tempered by courage. The Lycan king often stood at the battlements, watching the sunrise over the snow-draped mountains. But now he was not alone. The woman would join him, hand resting on her belly, eyes steady, heart strong. And sometimes when the wolves howled, he would hear the echo not as a call to fight, but as a promise that even in darkness, life could flourish, bonds could endure, and even a king cursed by the beast within could find redemption through love, trust, and the quiet courage of another. As spring approached, melting snow into streams and rivers, the castle walls glistened under the morning sun. The life within the walls had changed the fortress forever. The pregnant slave, now mother, now anchor, now a presence that had healed as much as she had been protected, smiled softly at the Lycan king. "You see," she said quietly, "home is not only stone and fire. It is trust. It is care. It is the willingness to protect even what seems fragile." He nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder and glancing down at the newborn child sleeping between them. "And you have taught me that," he said. "I have learned what it means to care, to protect, to love. Perhaps that is the truest strength of all." The wind rose gently, no longer a howl of warning, but a whisper of peace. The castle, the woman, the child, and the Lycan king, a man, a beast, and the life that bound them all, stood together as the morning light spread over the mountains. For the first time in centuries, he knew that he was not alone. And in that knowing, he understood something timeless and profound. A home was not merely walls, nor wealth, nor fear. It was where life, trust, and courage met, and where hearts could finally rest. The wolves howled once more, their voices strong and clear, a song not of darkness, but of belonging. The Lycan king held the woman's hand, and she rested against him, life moving quietly between them. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope, not only for survival, not only for power, but for something rarer, something infinitely precious: redemption, love, and the home they had found within each other.